Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
If I was to write a list of all the tricks we're missing in water, it would be long. And somewhere near the very top would be lobbying. Engagement with government on the federal and state level. I recognize we've made a lot of progress in the last 5 or 6 years in terms of securing capital for the required infrastructure renewal in the US, but there is a hell of a long way to go. But I look over the fence at energy, both legacy and renewables, healthcare, insurance, biotech, damn the gun lobby, and I can't help but think there is a massive gap between how effective we are in water and how effective we could be, and how much more support for the fundamental molecule we would get if we were. Mae Stevens is a specialist lobbyist for water at Banner Public Affairs, and she recently joined us for our founder forum in DC alongside fellow lobbyist and longtime friend of BIV, Dan Kidera. She and he, they were both so good, and I wanted to have her on the fundamental molecule to help demystify this murky area of water at scale. Please enjoy my conversation with Mae Stevens. Mae Stevens, how wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's really fun, especially because this is kind of a departure for us. We spend a lot of time mired in entrepreneurship. Not to say that what you're doing is not intrinsically entrepreneurial. It absolutely is. But we're sort of departing into the world of lobbying and Capitol Hill. And my first question for you is, what is a lobbyist? And what do you think is least understood by the general public about what you do?
So, okay, first of all, thanks so much for having me. This is so much fun. What is a lobbyist and what do people not understand about lobbying? So, I mean, a lobbyist is just a person that is exercising their First Amendment right to petition their government. They're doing that either on behalf of themselves or on behalf of a client. They're getting paid to do it or they're doing it themselves. So anyone who has ever written their member of Congress saying, I want you to vote for X, I want you to vote against Y. Anybody who's called their member of Congress, signed a postcard, any of those things, petition online, any of that, that is essentially lobbying. What a contract lobbyist like me does, like what a registered lobbyist does, is that we just do it all the time. We do it all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so that's sort of the difference, right? People pay me to do it for them because they don't have the time to do it themselves, right? Or they're not, they don't have the skills, they don't have the background to do it. But basically, that's all that it is. So I think a lot of people think about what a lobbyist is. They think of sort of the, sort of old white men smoking cigars in a back room, cutting deals and
whiskey and crystal.
We're not handing over checks and we're not bribing people into voting the right way on things.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how America works. But what we are doing is making really good cases for what our clients are trying to accomplish in the world. So whether that's, replacing all the lead service lines or increasing funding for the water sector or any of the things that you can possibly think of in the water space, that's what we're doing. And we're making arguments of the reason why you should do that. That's what a lobbyist is.
No, fantastic.
It's very straightforward.
No, exactly. I think this idea that this is actually a reflection of the First Amendment rights is a really interesting one, especially when you're doing it on the side of the angel, of course.
Yes.
Mae, you are, which is great. So you started your career pretty early on Capitol Hill, must have been a sort of obviously the perfect training ground for this, but can you just sort of talk us through that experience? What's it like to be there in amongst those hallowed chambers?
Yes. Well, so in the very, very first part of my career, I actually worked at nonprofit environmental organizations.
Oh, right.
And part of it was working with the Hill, trying to get basically lobbying the Hill from environmental organizations. And so when you think about, evil lobbyists, like Sierra Club has lobbyists, right? They're not all evil, right? So in that experience, I, was very young. I was in my 20s. I was talking to a lot of Hill staffers who are also in their 20s. And I thought, well, I'm a lobbyist and I'm going to tell these people how to tell their boss how to vote on this thing. What if I was just the person that was telling the member of Congress how to vote? Wouldn't that make me more powerful? So I went to grad school so that I could get a better, a good job on the Hill. And then very quickly realized that that is not how members of Congress decide how they're going to vote. It's not just that they don't know anything and then they listen to 20 somethings just tell them what to do.
She seems great. Let's do that. Yeah.
Sure. This is fine.
Sure.
This 20 something is telling me about tax policy. Perfect, right? So it's not exactly like that, but there is a heavy reliance on staff knowing and understanding what constituents care about, what people in the district, what the effects are of, the piece of legislation on the district, who likes the bill and who doesn't like the bill, and particularly just like, what does the bill do? Some of these pieces of legislation are thousands and thousands of pages. Members of Congress don't have time to read all of those.
Yep.
And then also take all the meetings with all of the people to try and figure out, do you like it and do you not? Which lines do you want to change and whatever. So they rely on staff a lot to do that negotiation. And so I was on the House side for a little bit. I worked for two members of Congress, Carnahan and Cartwright, which is great. Then I went over to the Senate side. I worked for Senator Cardin of Maryland. And that's when I really started working on water infrastructure issues specifically. Senator Cardin has a very long history of working on water infrastructure and lead poisoning from paint, from soil, from water especially. And when the Flint crisis sort of bubbled up to the national, to the DC level, where it wasn't just, a problem that was going to be dealt with by the state, but that, Washington, DC really had to get involved. He asked me to write a bill that would address the entire Flint crisis. And I was like, I don't know anything about that or water or anything. So I don't know what to do. I was sort of like shaking and I thought I was going to get fired. And I, sort of left the office and I quickly just sort of started calling a lot of the, there are just a handful of water infrastructure trade associations in Washington, DC. And so I called them and I asked them, my boss told me to do this thing and I don't know anything about it. What should I do?
Yep.
And they gave me a lot of really good ideas. I had to sort of, ground truth those and negotiate the language and all the stuff with everybody else, all of their, 99 Senate offices. But it was that sort of, that experience that led me to write the legislation that addressed the Flint crisis. And then I wrote the big legislation after that in 2018. And then I left the Hill because all I wanted to do was work on water infrastructure. And when you work for a senator, you only get to work on water infrastructure. You have to work on a bunch of other stuff too.
That's so interesting. So what reeled you in and what kept you here? What is it about it that you found kind of like fundamentally attractive?
I love water for a couple reasons. One, because I did all of the environment and infrastructure work for Senator Cardin. So I did transportation, I did airplanes, and then I did all of the sort of EPA, air, and Superfund and all of that stuff. I did energy for him. I did endangered species. I did Department of Interior, Department of Commerce, oceans, everything you can possibly think of that would sort of fall under energy, environment, infrastructure. And of all of that giant portfolio, I was the senior advisor for all of those things for him. And that entire portfolio, the one thing where I felt like I could really make a huge difference in the world is water infrastructure. Just for folks who are not following these vote counts from 2016.
The very few.
Yes, exactly. The Flint legislation passed, it was the WIN Act, W-I-I-N. The WIN Act passed the Senate 97-2. It had billions of dollars of funding in it. The bills that have billions of dollars in funding in it, they don't get 97 votes.
No.
That's almost unheard of, that vote count. And then the next one after that in 2018 got 98 yes votes. And I thought at that point, I'm doing that. And then I'm also negotiating on the sage grouse endangered species, like all of this, like very, like people are very, very in their corners. They have a long history of working on this and they're not changing their minds. And I just felt like there's basically no way of getting anything done in any of these spaces, but water infrastructure is the one place where you can really make a huge difference. And it affects every single person in the country. We're not doing a thing that's just like a tiny little piece of, it's like one tiny part of one industry. We are really affecting every single industry, every sector of the economy, and every single human in the country. They're all reliant every single day on water infrastructure. And so if you can make a change in that and you can get really high vote counts and you can actually get things passed, that's huge. That's why everybody in Washington comes to Washington, is because we want to make a difference in the world. And this is a place where you feel like you can really just do it.
Absolutely.
That's why I'm here. It's great.
I don't make a habit of agreeing too often with Lauren Boebert.
I can see.
Tend to be
Yes.
slightly divergent. But, when she said it again the other day, there are three things that Coloradans care about, and that's water, water, and water. Suddenly you are. It's so interesting to be able to work on something that structurally actually allowed you to make a huge amount of forward progress. And so how do you think that that's manifested on Capitol Hill kind of late? Just walk us through kind of the history of the addition. So you've mentioned Winnitz and what followed after that in 2018. But just as the lagging indicator almost of this is that one of the most striking things that I've seen recently is that we're in 2020, the line for water and sewer spending was kind of flat.
Right.
But then it just went up and to the right. It's gone from 38 billion to 68 billion in 3.5 years, according to data from GWI. And it's the only image, it's the only graph that I've seen that encompasses basically kind of March to call it early September 2020 that doesn't have some giant valley in it, the COVID plunge. It just sort of ignored it and then went up to the right, which suggests kind of a degree of resilience. Should we be characterizing what led up to that? And should we be characterizing this as kind of a new dawn of federal funding within water? How should we be thinking about this?
I think there's sort of two explanations for the sort of flat funding and then going up without the valley of death in the middle, right? One part of this is that 99% of the funding that we use every day to invest in our water infrastructure comes from just people paying their water bills. So it's mostly just people paying their water bills. That's not going to change just because there's a pandemic, right? There is a drop off a little bit because of, manufacturing stopped for a little bit, but that bounced back pretty quickly. And so water use and the paying of the water bills to the water utility essentially never stopped. But the good news, I think, on the political side is that, yes, you are definitely seeing an increased sort of dedication to investment in water infrastructure in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure law. That bill was the largest ever investment in history of the United States in water. We are seeing that was such a bipartisan effort in the water space specifically, that we're now seeing that it's a very bipartisan issue, which means that it's not going to change based on who controls Congress, who controls the White House. There's always going to be folks that are dedicated to investing more in water infrastructure, which is great because we really need it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it really is a phenomenal achievement, an extraordinary piece of legislation. But I'm greedy. One of the things I think that is really difficult for people to wrap their heads around, you've got $1.4 trillion a year annually spent on water, and still the infrastructure funding gaps, you can throw around whatever kind of $1 trillion number that you want. The provision of capital through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, for example, to someone like me is, there's still going to be a lot of problems still there at the end of this, which I realize is slightly fatuous and sort of stop it. We haven't had any for a really long time, and now we have much more than we did. But how do you see the potential for the catch-up? What does it sound like in the halls of kind of Congress as maybe this is somewhere that we really can close the gap? Because Flint happened, but Jackson, Mississippi happened really recently. And you're still hearing kind of day in, day out of stories where this work and investment is so sorely needed. So how should we contextualize it? Because it's awesome, but Tom greedy.
Right. No, I don't think you're greedy at all. I think that, to think about it this way. So $55 billion was how much we got in the bipartisan infrastructure law, largest ever investment in the history of the US. It also is only about 5% of what we actually needed just to bring our systems into a state of good repair. And that's what I think is the challenge, right? It's that, this is great, but we still need more. And so that means that we can't stop with this. We have to keep it going, right? We have to keep the funding going. And that is going to involve a lot of work in Washington. But the other thing that I would say, and this is the thing that, makes me so excited to chat with you guys and hear about, your amazing founders and all these cool stuff that you're working on, is that we have to do more with less, right? We can't just do infrastructure in the same, especially water infrastructure, in the same way that we have always done it. We have to figure out ways to provide safe, reliable water to people in a way that is cheaper. That is where you guys come in, right? That's where all of your startups come in, is because you're thinking about doing things in new and different ways. The sort of 5% of what we needed, that sort of, we need $1 trillion, that calculation, That's based on if we did water infrastructure the same way as we did it in 1950, which is the same way that we're doing it now, right? We're just putting pipes in the ground. We're hoping that they work. And then once they break, then we finally fix them. Like, we don't know what's down there until it's shooting up out of the ground. That's not a good way of doing water infrastructure. And frankly, it's not a sustainable way of doing it. And also, it's not a way that we can just keep on doing it forever, because it's just, Congress is not going to keep funding the same old thing. We've got to figure out ways of doing it better.
Exactly. One of the things by the way, the description of we bury it in the ground and then hope it works.
Yeah.
I wish that was further.
Yeah.
So one of the things that strikes me, does the existence of new paradigms of technology influence like what is actually acceptable within the kind of Overton window of legislation? Does the existence of better ways of doing things mean that legislation can change, and not just like EPA regulations, etc., but actual like legislation that goes in? Is there a kind of a self-reinforcing kind of mechanism there? Do lawmakers pay attention to what best in class is?
Yeah, I think that members of Congress try not to legislate on like specific technologies, but they more think about like, we want to get to this goal, and you can get to that goal. We want under 4 parts per trillion of PFAS in the water, right? You can get to that goal in multiple different ways. If you come up with a technology that will get you to under 4 parts per trillion of PFAS in, cheaper, then if you can prove it to us that the water is under that level, then you're fine, right? And so it's less about driving specific technologies and more about just putting in the funding and letting innovation happen. But there are a couple things that Congress can do, and that is put money into like early stage research and development. Congress does that for energy. We've seen that over and over again. There's like ARPA-E, right? There's DARPA, which everybody knows in the Defense Department. There's a ton.
Energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yes. ARPA-E at Department of Energy, but there's also like 1,000 other things at Department of Energy for research level, early stage investment. There's not really that in the water sector, but there could be. And so that is sort of the thing that I think Congress needs to know, that there is innovation in the water sector. I think there are some folks that are up on the hill talking about innovation, but it's not a ton. And so if you have a cool new idea, if you, listener, have a cool new idea of like a new technology that would solve some problem that Congress is trying to solve, definitely make sure that Congress knows that you exist, right? Because that could help them pass a bill. They could help them fund research in that area.
How should we think about the role of the EPA versus the role of the legislators? So the bicameral, you got the House and the Senate, which, according to what I've been listening about Nancy Pelosi, not necessarily always the best of friends.
Sure. Yes.
So how should we think about the role of the EPA? What should people understand about the EPA in the context?
I think that a lot of times when we talk about the EPA, we talk about like, oh, they're evil, they're regulating, they're putting lots of like costs on, businesses and utilities and cities, and regulation is bad. But I think that your founders, and I think folks listening to this podcast, should think about EPA as a market driver. They're the ones that are sort of speeding up the adoption of new technology. So they set a standard of 4 parts per trillion for PFAS, and then the market has to go out and figure out how to meet that. There are some technologies on the market today that can filter down to that level, but that doesn't mean that they're the best. And it doesn't mean that something new is going to come along and do it even better. And so they're sort of driving the market, and they're sort of the ones that are creating that market so that founders can go out and actually like sell at scale, right? Instead of just going to one community and selling because they have a problem, now you're selling to every community in the US. It's 150,000 water utilities in the US. Who wouldn't love that market? So that's the thinking behind it, is that is the scaling that every founder wants to do.
That's really helpful. So to continue this thread with the founders,
Yes.
What do you think, and maybe you can take it in kind of like degrees of maturity of company, but how do you think that founders should be thinking about engaging in the lobbying process? Like working with you or whatever it would be. From the earlier stages, how should they be thinking about it?
That is a like very open-ended question, because it depends on like the technology. It depends on what they're doing, what they're inventing, whatever. But it's a really good question, because that is like the fundamental question, right? If you want to count on government to help you scale, then you need to be working with government before you get to the point where you want to scale, right? You need to be thinking about it well in advance. One thing that you can be doing is looking at what government, either what Congress or what the administration, what EPA or whoever is doing to sort of write rules, write regulations, or write legislation that then needs to pass, right? And how do you sort of inform those to make sure that that your technology has an advantage there, right? And so if you're a company that is making a really cool new way of filtering for lead or PFAS or whatever, right? You want to make sure that EPA goes through with the regulation. You want to make sure that Congress doesn't stop them from doing the regulation, because that's the key to you having a market, right? If there's no requirement to filter out PFAS, then there's no market for your filter, right? So you want to make sure that they're doing that. And there are lots of ways to do that depending on what you're looking for. You want to look at other trade associations that are working in this space. Some of the water trade associations, they might not always be on the same side as you are. And so you want to look at, like, are the League of Cities, the Conference of Mayors doing it? Or are there environmental organizations that are working on this regulation? You can see all of that online in everybody's sort of what they're lobbying on and what their comments are to EPA. They're all posted for public consumption. But this is where it starts to get to the point where, like, you may want to work with a lobbyist instead of doing it yourself. And so that's kind of the difference. This is sort of what I like to say, like, I don't change the oil in my car, even though I probably could figure out how to do that. It's not that hard. I don't do it because I'm scared that I'm going to mess it up, and I am not an expert. And I can go and take it to an expert and they will do it. And yes, it costs a little bit of money, but I know it's going to be done right. And I know they're going to check for a bunch of other stuff too. They're going to keep an eye on my car, and then I don't have to do it because I don't have to be an expert. The same thing with, like, an accountant. You hire an accountant because, like, you don't want to do your own accounting. Like, that's fine, right? So the same thing is for lobbying as well. Is, like, at some point, this is a skilled thing that you need somebody who knows how the process works. And then you can bring them on to sort of help you guide through the process. But if you are thinking about working with a lobbyist, if you're like, I don't know, maybe I should, call up a lobbyist, right? Like, it's pretty easy to find us. You can find me online. Yeah. And then they'll sit down with you and they'll talk to you about it. And they should give you a pretty good understanding, a pretty good description of where your technology fits in with all the regulation that's coming down. If there's any sort of hooks that you guys can use to sort of get more funding or get a regulation that would help your business one way or another, right? Or if there's something bad that somebody's doing that would, like, stop that you would want to stop that legislation or that regulation because it's not good for your business, right? They'll tell you about that, and they should be able to tell you how they would go about affecting the change that you want to make. And if they can give you a pretty clear plan, if they can get it so that you, as somebody who is not a former Hill staffer, can understand it, then you'll be able to work with them.
That's super helpful. Okay, so I don't know whether do you have any examples of, like, how you can make it real? It doesn't necessarily have to be an early stage company. I think just, like, making this manifest, and you don't need to name the name of the company, but making this manifest so people kind of understand where it lies kind of practically. Can you say that?
Yes. So I work with a water filtration company. They filter lead out of water. EPA is putting together new regulations that would make the amount of lead allowable in water lower, so stricter regulations, and also require, when utilities are replacing all of their lead service lines, which they haven't been required to do before this regulation, once that is finalized, as they are replacing the lead service lines, they have to give out filters for free to people as they're replacing the lead lines. That is obviously a huge boon to their business. So what they hired me to do is to work with EPA to make sure that regulation is finalized, keeping the regulation just how it's proposed. There is a concern then, after that's finalized, that Congress can go and claw back that regulation, basically nullify it. So they've hired me to then make sure that Congress does not do that. And then after that, as we all know, there's not enough funding to replace all the lead service lines in the whole country. So we need more funding specifically for lead service line replacement, because as the lead service lines are being replaced, then the filters will go out. And so that's, again, more filters going out the door from this company. It's not guaranteed that that company is going to provide every filter in America, obviously. They're not going to get every contract with every water utility in the country. But they realize that that regulation is creating a market for a lot more filters, specifically lead filters, than there have been before. And so they want to create that market. They want to push that market. And so they wouldn't have known that Congress, they knew about the regulation. That's why they came to talk to me. They didn't know that Congress could claw back the regulation. So I had to explain to them that that was a bit risk to their business. And then I had to explain to them that actually the, historic levels of funding were amazing and were so exciting, but it's actually not nearly enough to cover the actual problem. And so you also need to do this other thing too, if you really want to realize the entire market that you think you're going to be able to realize. Just the statistics alone of the number of lead service lines in the country makes it seem like there's a huge market, but there are steps to getting filters into all the hands of all of those people. So that's what a lobbyist would do specifically for a specific company.
That's super helpful.
Okay.
That's super helpful.
Okay.
And I think it does speak to a little bit that idea of, you need to have the maturity to be able to stay with the maturity, to be able to, obviously build the engagement, to be able to stay with the process for long enough. But I'm also struck by kind of like how degree of specificity,
Yes.
right? What can make a huge difference. It doesn't have to be like, we have to have this entire chapter or subchapter or whatever of a large piece of legislation. It can be as simple as this is the thing that we'll make. And it's definitely kind of sniper rifle stuff.
Yes. It's like 3 lines in like a several 100-page regulation.
Yeah.
That's what we're focused on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's super interesting and such high leverage. I wanted to zoom out a little bit because one of the things that drives me absolutely bananas is it's always difficult when you sort of feel like the empire is all working very well together and the oil and gas companies are in lockstep and all they are the best people in the whole world working together.
Yes.
I don't know how far away that is from the truth, but it seems that they're pretty coordinated. We know that the renewable energy crew, pretty coordinated, sounds like.
Yes.
I mean, please correct me if I'm making assumptions here.
No, that's true.
How would you characterize the degree of coordination, particularly of the large private water companies, in terms of coming together to create universally beneficial legislation or support or whatever it would be, in the same manner that the renewables crew seems to, and that the O&G crew seems to?
And that's sort of like the fundamental problem that water has in Washington, is that there's just not enough of us, right? Like there's just not enough people working on policy in Washington. The reason for that is that the sort of the sectors that you have named, sort of the oil and gas sector, the renewable energy sector, they're huge. They're spending a lot of money in Washington so they can hire a lot of people. There's probably 10, 20 times as many lobbyists on the energy side as there is on the water side, probably more than that, actually. So they're just able to get more done because there are more people. The reason why they are able to do that, though, is because there's a lot more of the private sector in the oil and gas and the renewable side. Even electric utilities, a large percentage of them are not public, right? Like they're publicly traded. They're private entities that are publicly traded on the stock exchange.
Yeah.
Whereas we are talking in the water sector, the vast majority of utilities are public. They're just part of the Department of Public Works of the local city. Some variation on that. So of those, right, there is a small number of private water utilities. They have a trade association, National Association of Water Companies, NAWC. They're great. They have like a handful of lobbyists. They're doing the best they can with the budget that they have, right? And their lobbyists are great. I actually know them very well, and they're really good people. They work super hard. They work way harder than a lot of the oil and gas lobbyists I know. That is not a broad generalization about either sector, but of the people I know, the water sector folks are working very, very hard. That doesn't mean that 3 lobbyists can counteract 300 on the other side. But it does mean we need more people in Washington. We need more people, working in this space, because that will sort of rise all boats. Everybody working to sort of increase the sort of awareness of these problems. Then Congress is like, oh, I should probably address these problems because so many people have talked to me about it. It's like the attention economy, but it's just members of Congress, right? The number of people that talk to them all the time about renewable energy or oil and gas or just energy in general is enormous. They're just hearing about energy all the time. They're really not hearing about water that much, because even though we are working so hard and we're working, 15 hours a day, that doesn't mean that we're actually there's so few of us to actually be able to be breaking through.
Interesting. So presumably that's partially kind of, increased investment from the people who have the ability to increase their investment. Part of it is this is just a pretty sticky problem. But then I think, how else can we move the needle on convincing people that this is a a good and right place to be sort of placing, federal support for obviously something that we understand as foundational as water and sewer and stormwater and, all the rest of the infrastructure. What else do you think moved the needle? Is it kind of like groundswell of public opinion and large petitions and all that kind of stuff? How do you see this changing to be able to capture the minds of legislators or whatever it is that we need to do?
So that is the fundamental question that lobbyists try to answer every single day on whatever topic they're working on, is like, how do I get Congress to pay attention and care about this issue, right? So that is exactly the right question. I like to sort of take a step back and think that members of Congress are just people. Everybody has goals and hopes and dreams and like plans for the future and things that they really care about and the things that they don't really care about that much about. And you want to figure out what that person cares about, what that member of Congress is interested in, what is going on in their district, what's going on with their constituents, and what are the things that they care most about, and then explain to them why your thing works for them. And so it's like essentially, and I've never been in sales, but I think that that's kind of sales, right? Is like, how can my thing solve your problem? I have to know what your problem is first before I can figure out how I can solve it. That is really the case. So if you're a member of Congress that cares a lot about the economy and a lot about jobs in your district, then you want to hear ideas that are going to increase jobs, that are going to increase the economic development of your district, especially. All members of Congress, unless they are retiring, which is, most of them are not retiring every year, right? But all members of Congress, one of their big goals is to get reelected. The way they get reelected is that their constituents like them and then turn out on the voting day to like actually say, I like you, please stick around, right?
Right.
So what you want to do is, if you can't, and that's like sort of at the most basic level, right? So if you can't like donate to this person to sort of help their reelection campaign, which like you can or you don't have to, right? But if you want to just, there's other things that you can do, right? So you can get nice articles in the local paper about how they're supporting water infrastructure investment, they're supporting jobs, they're supporting whatever it is that they care about, whatever it is that their district cares about most. You can get those, press, you can do digital ads, you can do stuff on social media to really get people to think like, oh, this member of Congress, they really care about water infrastructure. And what we know is that sort of everybody cares about water infrastructure. The polling is sort of off the charts on water infrastructure in terms of like, what do people actually care about? And so you will know that if you're getting more and more positive press for that person in their district about water infrastructure, it's going to do two things. One, it's going to help them with their goals, which is get reelected. And two, it's going to show them that people actually care about water infrastructure. And it's going to sort of raise the elevation of the issue in their mind. So you can do that stuff. Those sort of like comms, those sort of grassroots stuff, those are tools that any lobbyist would suggest. Whether or not the client has the capability to do it or the funding to be able to do it or, is a different story. But those are all sort of tools in the tool shed of getting a member of Congress to be sort of interested in what you're doing and helping you.
No question. That's super interesting. And already, like, how can we help do that? One of the things I've always wondered is like, where is the Got Milk campaign for water?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
It's really, it's super irritating. Okay, one last question, because as with time of recording, DNCs, obviously everybody's out there with all of the hula balooja, what's it, like bunting. No one in the US knows what bunting is. Flags, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting one. November, it's either going to be a Harris government, and she has had a really interesting remit around water and has been very supportive of water, or it's going to be Trump, who, there was all sorts of things that didn't happen, but one of the things that they strengthened the lead and copper rule under his EPA. Now, it's probably not all going to be kind of picnics and ferries and all that kind of stuff. How do you think about post-November in terms of water's future? Should we be like, okay, because this is a sort of like really is a sort of one of the last standing bipartisan questions? Should we be scared? How are you thinking about it?
I am hopeful. I'm sort of stereotypically hopeful all the time. People make fun of me, but I think it's a good sort of personality trait to have in Washington because there's a lot of ups and downs. But I am very hopeful because I think that both the Harris and the Trump administration are going to not stand in the way of progress on water infrastructure. I also think that Congress is the one that holds the purse strings And if we're really thinking about creating new programs and funding the existing programs that we have, it's really up to Congress. And it's such a bipartisan issue that I think that we can make headway there. The only thing that I am very worried about is, and this isn't necessarily a Trump-Vance sort of stance, but is that a very small group of the Republican Party, it is not the entire Republican Party, very small group within the Republican Party that wants to really, really slash budgets. And we have been fighting that over the last several years, even through the Biden administration when there was this historic investment. And I think that that would very much be going in the wrong direction. And that's the thing that I think we really need to be nervous about. I wouldn't expect the Trump administration to be doing a lot of sort of proactive regulatory work, creating new regulations or reducing the limits on, lead or PFAS or any of those sort of contaminants in drinking water. But I would expect Harris to sort of double down on the work that has happened over the last 4 years and go even farther than the Biden administration has been.
Okay, food for thought in November. Lots of food for thought in November, not just that. But
Right.
Mae, I really appreciate this. We've come to the end of our time together. It's always such a pleasure to see you. You are a font of knowledge on this and many, many other things. And I really appreciate it. It's time for our last question on the fundamental molecule, which is always, what is the single most important piece of advice for future and aspiring water entrepreneurs?
That is the best question, right? I'm glad you end every episode with this. What is the one thing? I think that, and I may be biased in this, but I think the one thing is that you really need to watch what Washington is doing and engage with members of Congress, with the administration, and really look at how that is going to affect your business and actually engage and make a difference on the places where you want to make a difference. Whether that's funding, whether that's regulation, whatever it is, that's going to be the thing that could possibly scale your business nationwide. And so you really want to pay attention to it and you really want to engage where it makes sense. So come to Washington, say hi to me. We'll make magic together. It'll be great.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in the spring. I heard the foliage or flowers or whatever.
Yeah, cherry blossoms. Beautiful. Yeah.
It's really wonderful. Mae Stevens, thank you so much for being here. It has been a huge pleasure to have you on the Fundamental Molecule. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Tom. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.